even more when you know you're innocent. Even my close friends have lessons.
But you're so innocent. Why'd you never reply back to me, huh?
She posted great things about her.
Mark, I need to pick your brain.
How can I transition from childhood to adolescence and from adolescence to adulthood?
I would like to talk to you all about adolescence, a time of transition.
How can I pay off my mounting college loans?
If you're not working yet, if you don't have a lot of financial means yet, maybe you're still with mom and dad, don't have more than 2 credit cards.
How can we stop domestic violence?
I think domestic violence has many reasons to start with.
How do I connect my Coptic and American cultures and enjoy both?
Sometimes clashes with the Western culture, and sometimes the kids feel pressure to go out on dates with the opposite sex.
Welcome to Route 139.
Welcome to a new episode of Stop and Hop.
Before you try to change yourself, you obviously need help from God.
If I know more, I'm going to be judged more.
So it's almost like trying to portray yourself as someone that you're not.
If you want to change yourself, that's also something that you want. Bye!
CYC, Christian Youth Channel.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Ask on CYC. So what is Ask? Ask is ask, seek, knock. In order for this show to go and be successful, we need you to ask the questions. We're running. So the number is 0416 551 2. We have a great today because we have a great so the topic for today is I.V.F. So start sending your questions. We have Father Antonious with us today, so please, Antonious, thank you for coming on the show.
Hi, Min, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Okay, so the act of uniting in one flesh within a marriage is, whether it's for procreation or for love, it's a blessing it's a blessing from God under the Coptic Church. But in terms of procreation, whether a couple cannot reproduce the natural way, whether the uterus can't hold the egg, semen aren't good swimmers, therefore people resort to. So we're here today to look at these other methods and to see what the church. So Father, let's get straight into the topic. So as technology advances and science advances, all this stuff today, it's not written in the scripture. So is there a blanket rule, or is there something that we should look for in the scripture, or a verse that can cover such topics like these?
Well, I think when it comes to questions like IVF, the kinds of rules we're going to be looking for are things to do with life and the sacredness of life, the purpose of marriage, the role of within marriage, and possibly also some other moral questions, what constitutes adultery and what doesn't. And then of course you've got a very basic question of when something new turns up in the world, how do we approach it? Do we begin by assuming that it's wrong and then try and show that it's okay and then we can go ahead with it? Or do we begin by assuming that it's okay, and if we that is wrong in it, then we should stop it? So, with new technology like in vitro fertilization, which one should we take?
Okay, so let's have a look at IVF. So what's the processes behind it?
Well, in a nutshell, What normally happens is that through the act of sexual intercourse, the sperm from the man and the egg from the woman become one. The sperm enters the egg, and you now therefore have all the DNA, the genetic material of a unique new human being. That egg then starts to divide, 2, 4, 8, 16, so on. It implants in the uterus of the mother, and it grows into a baby. For families or couples which, as you said before, are not able to do that the natural way, part of that process can kind of be subcontracted to the laboratory. So they might collect the sperm from the father and an egg from the mother, usually more than one egg, and then they actually use a little tiny pipette, a little tiny glass tube, to actually poke a hole in the egg and inject the sperm into the egg. They then, in the laboratory, why they call them test tube babies, although I don't think they actually use test tubes, they use other equipment. They then grow that egg so that it begins to divide, becomes 2 and 4 and 8 and 16, and when it gets to a certain size, it's then into the mother's uterus, and from there on the natural process of pregnancy progresses.
Okay, so based on your little synopsis, what's the church's stance on this process before we get into further detail on?
Well, when we come to talk about the church's stance, I do have to give a warning that my Arabic skills are not terribly good. So if there are documents in Arabic that the church has produced, I'm probably not aware of them. But there is some discussion in English. His Grace Bishop Serapion, for example, in LA, has published some articles on this topic, and some others have as well. Generally, it's a very cautious position. I have read some clergy in the church who have said that IVF in total should be not allowed. It's bad to use IVF. But I've also read other points of view that take a much more open sort of approach. And basically, I think the one common denominator in the church teachings that I've seen so far is that if we are taking the life of a human being, then that is not allowed. But if we are just doing something that helps to enhance our lives, involve taking that life, to be okay. So then the question becomes, where does IVF fit into that? That's going to come down to the question of when does life begin? And generally, I think in the Catholic Church there is a fairly good consensus that life begins at the moment of conception. So from that moment that you first have both the father and the mother's DNA, one cell, a new human being. The only difference between that single cell human being and you is the number of cells, basically. There is no point in between that single cell and that fully grown adult. There is no clear point at which you can say before this point that wasn't a human being and after this point that was a human being. So if that's the case then, IVF in and of itself is not wrong. If you're simply using technology to create that human being or to facilitate the creation of that human being, that's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with that.
So when does it become wrong?
The problem is a problem. The problem is that in order to do this most cost effectively, what will usually happen is a large number of eggs will be fertilized and then put in frozen storage. So you might fertilize, say, 10 eggs. You then, at each attempt, may try to fertilize and implant, say, 3 of the eggs in the hope that at least one of them will actually take, because the failure rate is fairly high. If you succeed at your first attempt, and if the parents only wanted to have the one child, you now have, say, half a dozen eggs in storage. According to what we just said about when life begins, those eggs in storage are human beings. What do we do with them? Usually what happens is they're kept in storage until usually 10 years after they were formed, and then they're basically just disposed of. So if you believe that those fertilized eggs, let's call them zygotes, I think that's the technical term. If you believe that those zygotes are actually human beings and deserve the value and the respect of a human being, then to leave them there for all those years and then toss them in the rubbish clearly is a very bad thing to do.
Okay, and I understand some people, when they produce these eggs and store them, they're thinking about having another child later on. But you said that there's an expiry period to it.
That's right. I mean, by 10 years, usually a mother who comes to IVF has tried for a number of years child anyway. By the time she comes to IVF, she'll probably be in her 30s, possibly around 30. If she then stores them for another 10 years, she'll be probably 40 or over. She would still want to have a child after the age of 40. There's a whole lot of health issues involved there.
Okay. So the safe way is by producing one embryo at a time?
That would be a better way morally, definitely, if we don't want to have this problem of disposing of human zygotes. Financially, economically, that's a much worse way to do it, obviously, because then every time you want to have another go, you have to go through the whole process of the operation of removing the egg and etc. and fertilizing and so on. Of course, it's much easier to just do it all in one go.
Yeah. I have a statistic here about the storage you mentioned earlier. About 120,000 human embryos are now in storage across Australia.
Wow.
While the majority are used for future IVF cycles, for example, they have one kid now and they want to have another in the future.
Sure.
Thousands of them don't end up being needed. So a recent stat saying in Victoria alone, over 20,000 embryos were discarded as a result of reaching storage limit.
Yes, and if you think about it, that's in one state of Australia, where we always make a big fuss about the road toll. I believe in Victoria it's probably less than 1,000 a year. Less than 1,000 people die on the roads every year, and yet there's an awful lot done to try and prevent those less than 1,000 deaths. If we believe that those zygotes are all human beings, then we're actually killing 20,000 people every year, and very little is done about that.
Okay. Father, we just received a question from one of the audience members. They're saying, "Hi Abuna, theologically speaking, God did not create sickness and disease, but we brought it upon ourselves when we separated from the true source of life. In the light of this, while remembering that the Church Fathers taught that intention is vital when determining what is right by God or not, it is wrong to abort a child with terminal illness if the intention is to truly prevent him or her from a short life of suffering and pain." So that's what they're asking. Is it?
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, I think what they're asking is if you have a child who has a terminal illness or will die soon after birth, is it wrong to abort that child? I think it depends probably on the individual details of each case, but as a general principle, there are some conditions where I think the Church would be quite comfortable with an abortion. The case that's usually given as an example is a condition called hydrocephaly. Basically, the baby doesn't have a brain. And of course, you can't survive without a brain outside the mother's body. So long as it's in the mother's womb, it survives by the mother. Once born, the child dies within a day or two, usually, 3 or 4 at the most. I think in a case like that, a good case could be made for an abortion, in the sense that that child has no way of surviving after that. But let's take another case, something like cystic fibrosis, where it's a disease of the lungs, and people who have this disease have a much shortened lifespan, but may still live into their 20s or 30s. Now, I wonder, would you argue then that living into your 20s and 30s and being sick for most of that time, would we make that judgment that it's better not to be born at all? I don't think that any of us really have the right to make that judgment for the person. So in that kind of case, I think it would be very wrong to abort. Although in today's world, some people do suggest that that would be a good case where you should have an abortion, or say someone with Down syndrome or something like that. I think from the Christian point of view, we would argue that the quality of life doesn't only depend on things like how healthy you are, how smart you are, whether you can grow up and be a professional or something like that. I've met a number of beautiful Down syndrome people who will never be able to do most of the things that parents wish for their children. They simply don't have the ability to do it. But they're probably the happiest, cheeriest, most loving people. They'll come up and hug you. They laugh and laugh at the smallest thing. You know, who are we to say that that is a life that's not worth living?
Okay. Just a reminder to the viewers out there, you're international or local, SMS your questions or even call. We're taking phone calls today, so the phone number to SMS or call is 0416 551 292. If you're an international viewer, send your question to our Facebook page or to our YouTube page. We'll find it and we'll answer a few right here live. So going back to what the viewer asked about abortion, let's take it that step back and bring it back to the IVF clinic. So now they have something called Pyromapping or DNA fingerprinting, where while it being an embryo, they extract the cell and do tests on it to see if the DNA has been altered in a way where the child can be born defective. But what they do is, because, like you said, they produce a few embryos and they choose the best one and they test to see which ones are not the good ones and they just dispose of them. So is this also a form of abortion?
Well, this is opening up a Pandora's box, isn't it? I think there's that issue of destroying the ones that don't meet your standard. That's a big issue in and of itself. But then the question of whether we should even be testing in the first place, I think, is another very important question. You know, is this the opening of a door that we may never be able to close again and that we'll regret? There is talk already of practical possibilities of shopping for the kind of child that you want. It may not be that far away. It may be within the lifespan of some people alive today, that when they come to have a child, they'll be able to go to the doctor and choose what colour eyes they want and how much muscle bulk and whether they have the gift of, you know, being able to play music or they're good at maths or whatever, and you can kind of do a shopping list of things for your child. Well, that now raises a whole lot of issues. Are we taking too much control of our lives when we do that? What kind of a relationship will there be between the parents and the children later on? What if I, as a parent, design my children to be very good piano players, but then they grow up and they want to play football? They want to be a prop forward, you know, or a big running back or something in a football team. Well, aren't they going to be upset with me that I chose the wrong characteristics for them? And what kind of effect will that have on family relationships between parents and children? And then, of course, there's a whole question of divine providence. You know, one of the stories of Genesis tells us about people who tried to take too much control of their life and in fact take the role of God in their own lives. The Tower of Babel I'm talking about. And that was something that God rejected. Are we the kind of creatures who are capable of having that much power, our very existence, and the kind of people that we are? I don't know what the answers to all these questions are. And in this whole area of reproductive technology, I think the technology runs a long way ahead of the ethical discussions and the moral discussions and the theological discussions. And I don't know if that's a good argument for slowing down the technology or speeding up the theological discussions.
Yeah. A lot of misconceptions people have is that resulting to IVF has a higher chance, but really research have shown that IVF has a 30% chance of working. So we're going to go for a quick break, and when we come back, let's look at other options out there. So, okay, look, we were just about to go to break, but we just got a phone caller who just came in. So we're gonna put this caller on air and let's hear what they have to say. Hi caller, and welcome to Ask. Hello? Okay, we just lost the caller. So please call back to 0416 551 292. And if you have any questions that you want to SMS, please SMS to the number 0416 551 292. Thank you.
Daniel is a faithful man.
Oh, that was exciting for a minute there, wasn't it?
I remember and I learned from Daniel that God is the source of all wisdom and power. Historical chapters where we read about what's happened in the life of Daniel as they were in exile.
And because of Daniel's obedient and submissive heart, God took him and made him better.
The dream had, and no one was able to tell what the dream meant and the meaning of the dream except Daniel. This is his promise. If we are faithful to him, he will be faithful to us as well.
Bible study on the book of Daniel in Hosanna.
الشخص الروحي يشعر أن حياته ناس. وربنا أعطاه هذه الحياة لخدمة الناس ولإسعاد الناس.
CYC, Christian Youth Channel.
Welcome back to the episode on Ask on IVF. Just before we went to the break, we had a caller who came in and they tried again. So for future callers and future people who want to send text messages, please, the number is 0416 551 292. So let's hear this caller. We have a caller from London. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Abuna.
Yeah, hi. You have to speak up. Abuna can hear you.
Right, okay. I just have a question. As a Christian, we are allowed to give egg donation for the people who want to have a baby? Is that my question? Thank you very much.
The caller's asking if they can give egg donation.
Oh, okay. It sounds like a relatively simple question, but it has a lot of issues involved in it. So I think on the plus side, it's certainly a good thing to do. One can imagine that egg donation is going to go to a couple who are desperate to partake of the miracle of new life, who want to have a child of their own that they can love and bring into the world and care for. So to help them to be able to do that is, of course, a beautiful thing. Now, what's going to happen, of course, though, is that genetically, biologically, the donor's DNA is what's going to be in the child. Now, is this going to be a problem? So it brings up questions like adultery, for example. Now, if you think about it, what is it that makes adultery adultery? If an adulterous relationship produces a child, is the problem in the fact that two people who are not married donated their genetic material to make a new child? Is that what makes it adultery? Or is it the physical relationship that happens between the two people that makes it adultery? If we're going to accept that it's just the physical relationship but not the genetic issue, then that's fine. To donate an egg would be fine. You're not really committing any kind of adultery. But if we're going to say that we're going to have a definition of adultery that includes the genetic contribution to a new child, then consider egg donation as adultery. Personally, I think that is more on the intention and the physical, emotional, spiritual union between the two people who are not married. I don't think that the genetic issue should come into it. So if we were to take that point of view, then it would be perfectly okay. In fact, a very good thing, a very kind and compassionate thing to donate an egg. There are still, of course, other issues that are going to be raised. Having donated my genetic material to me, the donor, am I going to want to meet that child? Am I one day going to wish that that child with me, so that I could bring them up? Is there going to be
this also extends to sperm donors also?
And sperm donors the same thing as well, of course. So how do you resolve issues like that? Are they legal issues to be resolved in a court, which doesn't seem to be a very desirable scenario? Are they simply moral, interpersonal issues that you discuss with between the donor couple and the couple? Again, these are open questions. I'm not sure I have good answers for them.
Okay. Well, it was a very interesting question from the caller, and thank you for the call. So let's look into surrogacy. What is surrogacy?
Okay, so surrogacy is basically then that a couple where the mother for any reason is not able to actually carry the child in her own womb, again kind of subcontracts that part of the process to somebody else, in this case another woman who is not the genetic or biological parent of the child. So perhaps you'd have an IVF process that fertilizes an egg between a married couple, so the husband and the wife contribute the genetic material, but rather than implanting it in the womb of the biological mother, you would implant it in the womb of another woman, who then carries it through to term, the baby is born, and usually what should happen is that baby is then returned to the biological parents.
Okay, and what's the church's stance on that?
Again, I think the little I've found in English has been fairly critical of surrogacy. However, although the position is made fairly clear, the reasons for the position are not so clear in the things that I have read. And again, there's a number of issues that we could discuss here on both sides. So on the one hand, are we doing something that's unnatural and therefore wrong, because we should be doing things that are natural? On the other hand, most of what we do as medical treatment is quite unnatural. Most of the medicines that people take are actually poisons. If you take them in large enough doses, they will kill you. So it's kind of unnatural to take a poison, but it does make you better if you take it in the right dose. To have an operation to remove a cancer, that's unnatural. You're stopping the natural course of how your body was going to go ahead. But I think everybody would agree removing a cancer is a good thing to do. So we would have to have a clear reason of why being a surrogate mother and being unnatural is wrong. Simply being unnatural in and of itself, I don't think is a powerful reason for it being wrong.
Okay, because I know in Australia there is no law whether there should be compensation for the surrogate mother, but I know if further down the track the surrogate mother becomes emotionally attached and decides that she wants to keep the child, and matters does reach court, the court will always, give the of the child, and most of the time the best interest of the child would be the surrogate mother. So that's it becomes very dangerous and scary.
Well, it does, and I think that is one of the arguments against really a lot of reproductive technology in general, IVF, cloning, surrogacy, all of those things, is that it's going to lead us into complicated situations. So wouldn't we be better off not doing it at least until we work out all those things, up front? And I don't know if we ever can work them out up front, in which case that argument would lead you to say, let's not do them at all. But then we have to balance the argument, from that against the argument of the benefits and the good that this kind of technology can do in the life of people.
Okay. I got a question about adoption. under the Coptic Church, can we use adoption?
Yeah, adoption actually is a very good thing. There are a few exceptions, but by and large, the historical views about adoption is a very good thing to do. You're basically giving an orphan or a child who would otherwise not have had a good family life a chance to have that good family life. And God is all for looking after the widows and the orphans, you know, the underdog, the underprivileged. So certainly adoption is a very good way to do that.
Okay. I want to, let's say from the first go, a married couple, they try, but they weren't successful doing it the traditional way. Couldn't they just turn around and say, but this is the will of God, why should I try these other methods?
It's an excellent question. And it's one that comes up in every aspect of our life, really. How much of our choices are our will and how much are we surrendering to the will of God? I think on one side you could certainly make that argument. If God doesn't let us have children naturally, then maybe God doesn't want us to have children at all. If we had lived at any other period of history apart from the last 30 years, it wouldn't even have been an option. It wouldn't have been open to us. We would have just had to accept the situation. Maybe we would have gone for adoption instead of staying childless or whatever. Now that we have this opportunity and we can do something, is it therefore contravening the will of God? But I think the argument could also be made that we take things into our own hands in exactly that way in so many other in life, and we accept them all. When you have a chest infection and you go to your doctor and you take antibiotics, are you not taking things into your own hands? You could argue maybe it's the will of God that you be sick and stay at home for 2 weeks. Maybe you're going to have a car accident if you go out, you know, in that second week. If you go and get the antibiotics and you get better quicker, how do you know you're not going against the will of God? But I think very few people would see that argument as being a convincing argument. I think we would say, no, disease is a part of the fallen nature of this world. It wasn't designed in the good world that God initially created, but it's a function of this world. Infertility is a disease. It's not the way that we were meant to be. So to use medical means to overcome disease, I think is a commonly accepted principle. People are happy to go to the doctor to use surgery or operations, medications or therapies of any kind in order to overcome diseases, and we don't see that as being going against the will of God.
Okay. Just a reminder to the viewers to SMS or call your questions 416 51 292. Abuna, we just got a question from one of our audience members. So they're asking, so can I use another man's sperm, not my husband's, to try for a baby?
Well, it's similar to the egg donor question. I think the question she's asking is, would I be doing something wrong if I did that? And again, I think the question, you would then have to ask the question, what could be wrong in doing that? Now, would that make it a case of adultery? I don't think so. As I said before, I don't think contributing genetic material makes it adultery. Is it going against the will of God? I don't think so, because you're using a medical therapy to overcome a disease. Is it going to cause moral and ethical and personal problems, knowing that my child genetically will be someone else's son? That, I think, is a matter that the couple have to discuss with their parish priest, with their counsellor, you know, with the psychologists that are usually attached to fertility clinics. By all means, I think they're very important issues that have to be addressed by the couple. But if they don't have any major obstacles in emotional, interpersonal sort of area, I can't think of anything else that would be wrong. What else could be wrong there?
Okay. So, doing my research on this topic, I found that there is no 100% foolproof procedure that a person can go through to fall pregnant. So, scientific and technological advancement. At the same time, would you agree if we should also put our faith in God using these other methods, Abuna?
Of course, I think that goes without saying, but thank you for saying it. Look, of course, and again, we do exactly the same thing when we seek medical treatment for our diseases. Yes, we use the gifts that God has given to us as a human race, but we also in the end understand that we are in God's hands. You know, there's no foolproof therapy for the cold or for cancer or for heart disease or diabetes or any of those things, but we do our best and we leave the matter in God's hands. It may be that a couple may do everything exactly correctly and go through the whole IVF process and end up without having a child. I think, you know, then they can feel comfortable that they've at least done what they could, but maybe then they would need to start dealing with accepting that maybe that it's not going to be for them to have a child.
Okay. I've got a question that just came in from an audience member. If I donate an egg or a sperm, am I then partially responsible for the child's salvation and the upbringing in the eyes of God?
Oh, that's a good question. I've never thought of that before.
Oh yeah.
Okay, let's see what we can do with it. I think then what we're really asking is that by being the origin of the will of another human being, does that come with responsibility for their spiritual growth and for their faith and so on? Perhaps if you think of being the donor of a child who's up for adoption, would you then have a responsibility for the spiritual well-being of that child, even though that child is being brought up by other parents? I think most people would probably agree that it's really up to the adoptive parents, and that by me donating the child, I'm kind of giving up my responsibilities. Not giving them up, transferring them to the parents who have adopted that child. And maybe I could exercise my responsibility by choosing parents who share my faith to make sure that the child grows up, you know, in the right way. But if those parents said to me, you know, we don't want you to have anything to do with this child, leave us to deal with the child, I think that I probably would have to give in, and I don't really have any rights over that child once I've given it. And I think perhaps we could say the same thing about being an egg or sperm donor.
Okay. We just got a caller from Sydney. Hi caller, and welcome to Ask.
Hi Abuna, hi Mina.
Abuna, can you hear? Okay.
Okay, I'll speak up.
Yes,
love the
please.
show. Just a quick question. In the media lately, there was a lot of news about the UK approving 3-person IVF. With DNA from 3 different people. What's the church's stance on something like this? And is it a case of science playing God, or science going too far in terms of modifying human beings, I guess?
Okay. You got that?
Okay, I missed the last 5 seconds of it, but the 3-person donor IVF program. Look, personally, I think that was all a bit of media hype, to be honest, because the 3rd person involved, all that they're donating is the mitochondrial DNA. So what the mitochondria are a little tiny part of a normal human cell. They're the part that kind of produces the chemical reactions that give energy to power the processes of the cell. So the DNA in the mitochondria is a totally different thing to the DNA in the nucleus of the cell. And most people would consider that really the individual person is constituted by the DNA in the nucleus of the cell. So if you want an analogy, I think donating mitochondrial DNA, or mitochondria as a whole, is a bit like having a heart transplant. It's a bit like having one organ of your body transplanted from somebody else. And the only difference being, rather than it being a whole organ, it's like little bits of every cell.
Yeah.
So I don't see that is a major ethical issue at all, because that's all that it is.
Okay. Well, thanks for the caller for that question. Thank you very much. But that's all we have for today, Abuna. And thank you for being on the show. It's been a pleasure, and it's been a blessing to hear your insight on this topic.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure being here and being very hard.
Thank you, Abuna. Also, a reminder to the viewers, this week is Passion Week, so we will not be having a show, but the following week we'll be having a show on politics. So please take the number down and tune in for not next week, which is Passion Week, the following week, which is about politics, and the number is 0416 551 292. So thank you to all the viewers, whether you're national or international, and thank you for being on the show on Ask. And I'm Mina Ibrahim from your CYC studios in Sydney. Thank you and God bless.
CYC, Christian Youth Channel.
Are you interested in youth problems?
I have many friends who would say that their body is their business.
Do you wonder of specific matters in your life?
The reason why they created that choir was to stop women from actually talking and from gossiping.
Are you afraid of making some quick decisions?
Abortion shouldn't happen because we don't know if the fetus is a person.
Do you